The photo was old, grainy, and faded, but she'd know that face anywhere. Julia Foster stood frozen at the entrance of a grocery store in Charleston, South Carolina, clutching a bag of oranges as her eyes locked on the missing persons board. Her heart slammed against her chest. There, right beside notices for runaway teens and lost pets, was the face of her dead husband. "Have you seen this man?" the poster read. And beneath it, name Ethan Foster. Last seen in Portland, Oregon. Missing since 2023. Julia couldn't breathe. Ethan had died in the war. She had buried his uniform, wept over a folded flag, held onto a death certificate signed by the U.S. Army that said his body was never recovered but presumed dead after a convoy explosion in Kandahar. That was nearly 2 years ago, but now his face stared back at her. Alive, older, bearded, but unmistakably him. She dropped the oranges, her legs trembling as she fumbled for her phone and snapped a picture of the poster. Her mind raced. It had to be a mistake, someone who looked like him, a cruel doppelganger. But her heart screamed otherwise. She rushed home, barely noticing traffic, ignoring honking horns, her breath uneven. When she burst through her front door, her sister, Clara, jumped up from the couch. "Jules? What's wrong?" Julia shoved her phone into Clara's face. "Tell me that's not him." Clara squinted. Her jaw slackened. "Oh my God, that's Ethan." "But he's dead," Julia whispered. "They told me he was dead." Clara slowly sat down. "You need to call someone. Maybe the army. Maybe the cops." "I'm not calling anyone yet," Julia snapped. "Not until I know what this is." That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She lay on her bed, phone in hand, zooming in and out of the poster image. Her memories swirled. Ethan's laugh, his crooked smile, the way he'd kiss her forehead before deployments. The promise he made to always come home. He hadn't, until now. The next morning, Julia drove to the Charleston police station. She showed the photo to an officer at the front desk and explained everything. Ethan's military death, the poster, her disbelief. The officer took down her information, looked mildly concerned, but non-committal. "We can check with the Portland PD," he offered. "That's where the poster originated. Might be a case of mistaken identity." "I need to know," Julia said, voice breaking. "Because if that's really my husband, then something is terribly wrong." A week passed before anyone got back to her. Julia had started to doubt herself. Maybe the resemblance had played a trick on her grief. Maybe she wanted it to be Ethan so badly, she made herself believe it. But then the call came. "This is Officer Nate Carson, Portland Missing Persons Division. You filed an inquiry about Ethan Foster." "Yes," Julia said breathlessly. "Well, we may have something, but I prefer to speak in person." Julia flew to Portland the next day. She was met at the airport by Officer Carson, a tired-looking man in his late 40s who spoke in clipped, measured tones. "I have to ask," he said as they drove to the precinct. "Are you absolutely sure this is your husband?" Julia clutched her purse. "I'd stake my life on it." Then this is about to get very strange. At the station, Carson showed her more than just the poster. He pulled up surveillance footage from a small diner outside Portland, dated 6 weeks ago. In the grainy video, Ethan Foster walked in, sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and paid cash. No military uniform, no ID, just a quiet man with haunted eyes. "We ran facial recognition," Carson said. "Got 0 hits in civilian databases. But then we ran it against military databases because his demeanor suggested prior service. That's when it pinged a match." Carson turned the monitor to face her. A military photo appeared. "Ethan Foster. Status, deceased." "I don't understand," Julia whispered. "Neither do we," Carson said. "But your husband didn't die in Kandahar. He went missing. Then why would the army tell me he was dead? Why would they give me a folded flag and a certificate? That's what we want to find out." Julia left the station dazed. Her mind reeled as she walked the Portland streets. How was Ethan alive? Why had he vanished? Had he forgotten her? Chosen to disappear? She had more questions than answers, and a burning need to find the truth. Later that night, in her hotel room, Julia stared at the photo again. Every detail, every line of Ethan's face told her it was real. This wasn't hope. This wasn't grief. This was fact. Somewhere out there, Her husband was alive, and he had let her believe he was dead. The weight of Julia's discovery pressed down on her chest like a slab of concrete. She sat motionless on the park bench, rainwater soaking through her jeans, her breath caught somewhere between a scream and a sob. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the missing person flyer. It was impossible, unreal, but there he was, Nathan. Her Nathan, the man she buried 3 years ago, now staring back at her in grainy black and white. The poster said the man's name was Ethan Brooks, age 38, last seen wandering in a small town 3 hours north of where she lived. The image was a surveillance still, clearly taken from a store camera. He looked thinner, more rugged, beard longer, but it was him. The shape of his eyes, the slope of his nose, even the subtle scar that ran beneath his left ear. She'd kissed that scar every night before he deployed. A part of her wanted to rip the paper into shreds and convince herself it was just a cruel coincidence. Another part, more primal, more desperate, refused to let go of what her heart knew. Nathan was alive. She drove home in silence, the radio turned off, her mind playing every possible explanation. Could it be an impersonator? A twin? A man with an eerie resemblance? But she knew the truth, and it screamed in her bones. The army lied. That night, Julia didn't sleep. She laid on the living room couch, the flyer clutched in her hand, the TV flickering in the background. When morning broke, a fragile kind of determination gripped her. She opened her laptop and started searching. She found it, a story buried in the local news archives of a small town called Haven Creek. A man had been found sleeping in an abandoned barn near the edge of town, disoriented and silent. He had no ID, no known relatives, no memory. Locals had taken to calling him Ethan, after the farmer who found him. Julia's heart skipped. The article was dated just 3 weeks ago. By noon, Julia had packed an overnight bag, printed every photo she had of Nathan, and hit the road. The drive to Haven Creek was long, winding, and eerily quiet. As the hours passed, dread began to creep in. What if she was wrong? What if this wild journey only ended in disappointment? But something deep inside her wouldn't let her turn around. She arrived at the town just after sunset. Haven Creek was the kind of place where time seemed to forget its own existence. No big stores, just a handful of diners, hardware shops, and one tiny sheriff station. She went straight there. Sheriff Owens was in his mid-50s, kind-eyed but cautious. He listened patiently as Julia poured out her story. How her husband had been declared dead during his 3rd tour in Afghanistan. How she'd lived with that loss, buried his uniform, and then, just yesterday, saw his face on a flyer. Owens leaned back in his chair. The man you're talking about, we don't know much. He doesn't speak, not much anyway. Came out of nowhere, no memory, no ID, just a name someone gave him. Ethan. He's been staying at the Willow Creek shelter just outside town. You're welcome to see him, but I gotta warn you, he's not the same man if he is your husband. Julia's hands were clammy as she drove to the shelter, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The building was small and plain, nestled near a forest line with a rusted sign that read, Willow Creek Community Refuge. The receptionist greeted her and guided her down a hallway, stopping at a room with a cracked door. He's in there, she whispered. Julia stepped inside and stopped cold. The man sat by the window, gazing into the twilight, his shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His face was partially shadowed, but when he turned, the world slipped from under her. Nathan. He looked older, more weathered. His once sharp military posture now curved and uncertain. His eyes, once bright and full of purpose, were hollow, haunted, but they were still his. Nathan, she whispered, stepping forward. The man's eyes flickered. He stared at her, confusion flashing across his face. Then something, a flicker of recognition. Or was it fear? He stood slowly, unsure, and backed away slightly. It's me, she said again, barely breathing. Julia. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. His eyes brimmed with tears. I know you, he rasped, voice hoarse from disuse. I've seen you in my dreams. Julia fell to her knees. It's really you." He stepped forward cautiously, like someone approaching a memory, and knelt beside her. His hand reached for hers, tentative, shaking. But before they could say another word, the shelter doors flew open down the hall. Heavy boots, raised voices. Sheriff Owens appeared at the door, eyes grave. "Julia, you need to come with me. Now." She turned, startled. "What's going on?" He handed her his phone. "We just got a call from a military official. They're claiming Nathan Barrett was part of a classified operation, and that if he's alive, you're both in danger." Julia looked from the sheriff to her husband. No, the man who used to be him. His expression had shifted. A flicker of something dark passed across his face. "Danger?" she whispered. And Nathan, or Ethan, looked her straight in the eye and said the last thing she expected to hear. "They're coming for me." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, freezing Julia in place. Sheriff Owens looked between them, the tension mounting. "Who's coming, son?" Nathan, or Ethan, or whoever he was now, stood up, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the window, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "I don't know their names," he muttered, "but they're not military. Not really. Not anymore." Julia's voice cracked. "Nathan, please, just tell me, what happened to you? Where have you been?" He turned to her slowly, and in his eyes was a kind of fear she had never seen before, not even when he deployed. It was the look of a man who had been to a place beyond death and come back with pieces missing. "I was captured," he said, his voice distant, "but not by enemy forces. Not at first. Our convoy was rerouted. I thought it was just a change in orders. They told us we were being assigned to a special unit. Black Ops. No records. No questions. We were told we'd be saving lives, stopping threats before they reached American soil." He swallowed, and Julia noticed the way his hand shook. But it wasn't like that. Not even close. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were experiments. Sheriff Owens took a step forward. "What kind of experiments?" Nathan chuckled bitterly. "Mind control, memory erasure, psychological manipulation. They used us to test drugs, isolation chambers, hallucinogens. They said it was part of a program to harden elite units, make us unbreakable. But it broke us instead." Julia's stomach turned. This couldn't be real. It sounded like a conspiracy theory from the depths of the internet. But looking at Nathan now, the haunted expression in his eyes, the quiver in his jaw, she knew he wasn't lying. "We were ghosts," he continued. "No official records. No support. Just silence. And when the program started falling apart, they began eliminating us." "Eliminating?" Owens asked, frowning. "Stage accidents. Fake firefights. Missing in action reports. My unit was picked off one by one. I only escaped because one of the doctors helped me. He injected me with a counteragent. Told me to run. Said I'd lose my memory for a while. But if I could stay hidden, I might survive." Julia was breathless. "That's why they told me you died. They didn't lose you, they erased you." Nathan nodded. "And if they find out I've resurfaced, they'll finish what they started." A loud bang echoed from outside the shelter, and all three of them jumped. Sheriff Owens immediately reached for the sidearm at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, then vanished down the hallway. Julia turned to Nathan, grabbing his hand. "We have to leave. Now." He hesitated. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "I do," she whispered. "And I'm not losing you again." They slipped out the back exit, just as flashing lights filled the front lot. Two unmarked black SUVs rolled up silently, no sirens. Men in dark uniforms with no clear insignias stepped out, speaking into earpieces, moving like wolves in formation. From the shadows of the woods behind the shelter, Julia and Nathan watched as the shelter was surrounded. She turned to him. "They're not here to ask questions." "No," he said. "They're here to clean up loose ends." They ran deeper into the trees, where Haven Creek faded behind them and the night swallowed the path. Every twig crack sounded like a gunshot. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. They didn't stop until they reached an old service road. Julia's car was still parked near the sheriff's station, but the town wasn't safe anymore. Not for either of them. Nathan stared out into the darkness as Julia drove. "There's someone I need to find," he said finally. "If he's still alive, he'll know what to do." "Who?" The doctor who helped me escape. His name is Marcus Hale. Julia didn't hesitate. Where do we find him? Nathan rubbed his temples. Last I knew, he was hiding out in New Mexico, somewhere off the grid. He was afraid they'd come for him too. It was barely a lead, but it was something. As they drove through the night, exhaustion weighed heavy on them both. But even heavier was the growing realization that this wasn't just about a husband returning from the dead. It was about a machine, an operation designed to erase people from existence. A system so deeply buried, so ruthlessly protected, that anyone who touched it risked vanishing too. And now Julia had touched it. They stopped at a roadside motel under a false name. Nathan shaved his beard, and when Julia handed him a pair of scissors to trim his hair, her hands trembled. With every cut, she was peeling away the stranger, Ethan, and finding pieces of her husband underneath. Later, lying in a creaky bed in silence, Julia whispered, "Why didn't you try to contact me when you remembered?" "I didn't know who I could trust," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you were even real or just another part of what they put in my head." She turned to him, eyes wet. "You're real to me, and I'm not letting them take you again." Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere, headlights passed without stopping, and in the flickering light of the motel room, Nathan pulled her close and whispered something she hadn't heard in years. "I missed you." Julia closed her eyes, tears streaming. "I never stopped waiting." But peace wouldn't last, because somewhere far away, in a surveillance room filled with blinking monitors and humming machines, a red indicator lit up on a screen. Subject reactivated. Phoenix 17 compromised. And just like that, the hunt resumed. The motel room was still dark when Julia woke up in a cold sweat. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the past 2 days crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Nathan, the poster, the confession, the pursuit. She reached for him instinctively, but the bed beside her was empty. "Nathan," she whispered. No response. She got up quickly, her heart hammering, and found him standing by the window, staring out at the road. His shoulders were tense, his breath uneven. "They're getting closer," he said, not turning around. Julia moved to him and gently placed a hand on his back. "How do you know?" Nathan turned, his eyes glassy and distant. "Because last night, I remembered something else. Something worse." He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small metal device. It looked like a key fob, but thicker, heavier. He held it carefully, like it might explode. "Dr. Hale gave me this before I escaped. He told me to destroy it if I ever remembered who I was. He said if I didn't, they'd find me, no matter where I ran." Julia stared at it. "What is it?" "It's a tracker," he said, "but not just a tracker. It holds files, data on what they did to us. Names, locations, logs." He said it's proof, but it's also bait. Julia's stomach dropped. "That means they've been following you because of this." He nodded. "And if they catch me, they'll erase everything. Me, you, anyone I've touched." A silence fell between them, thick, suffocating. "What do we do?" she asked finally. Nathan looked down at the device. "We exposed them." The next few hours moved fast. They ditched the car, swapped their clothes for thrift store finds, used cash only. Every move was calculated, every step cautious. Nathan remembered a contact, an old journalist named Vera Carr, someone who used to write about military corruption until she mysteriously vanished from mainstream media. He believed she was still out there, operating through an encrypted news channel called Echo Wire. It took 2 burner phones, a VPN, and a risky message through a deep web forum. But by the next day, they had a response. A meetup, one night only. Abandoned chapel on Route 12, 10 p.m. They arrived just before the hour, hearts pounding. The chapel was decrepit, its paint chipped and windows long shattered. Candlelight flickered from inside, and there she was. Vera Carr looked older, wearier than Nathan remembered, but her eyes were sharp. "Phoenix 17, she greeted with a ghost of a smile. "You survived." Nathan handed her the device. "I need the world to know." Vera took it, slipping it into a lead-line case. "You have no idea what you're holding. If what I think is on here is real, it could bury an entire branch of black military operations. This changes everything. Julia stepped forward. "We don't care about the headlines. We just want them to stop hunting him." Vera nodded. "Once I publish this, they won't be able to silence him again. The eyes of the world will be watching." But before she could say more, there was a sharp whistle outside. A warning. "Run!" Nathan shouted, grabbing Julia's hand. Gunshots shattered the chapel windows. Men in tactical gear flooded the grounds, silent, coordinated. No police, no insignias, just shadows with weapons. Vera dove behind the pulpit, grabbing a hidden hard drive and shoving the tracker inside. She screamed to Nathan, "Buy me 60 seconds." He didn't hesitate. He pulled Julia through the side door as he turned and opened fire with a small pistol Vera had tossed him. Screams, shouts, chaos. Julia ducked low, her heart pounding in her ears, trusting Nathan's instincts. They raced through the overgrown cemetery behind the chapel, scaling the fence just as headlights lit up the path. They ran through the woods, Nathan limping now. He'd been hit. A grazing shot on his leg. Blood stained his jeans. "We need help." Julia gasped, frantically looking around. Then they saw it. A lone truck parked by the service road, engine running. The driver was Vera. "Get in." They dove into the truck bed, and she peeled out as bullets cracked through the trees. They drove for hours. Vera got them to a safe house in the mountains, deep off the grid. There, she uploaded the files. The truth spilled out. Names of soldiers used in psychological experiments, evidence of unethical human testing, internal memos signed off by high-ranking officials. It was a horror story disguised as national security. The press exploded. Anonymous sources confirmed the authenticity of the files. There were protests, demands for investigations. The secret division was dismantled under public pressure. But justice didn't come quickly. Many of the perpetrators vanished. Some died under mysterious circumstances. And Nathan? He would never fully heal. Not from what they did to him. Not for what he remembered. But he was free. Months passed. Julia and Nathan moved again. New names, new town. Somewhere quiet, where he could rebuild piece by piece. Sometimes he still woke up screaming. Sometimes he forgot where he was. But Julia was always there, grounding him, reminding him of who he really was. Not Phoenix 17, not Ethan, but Nathan Cole, her husband, her love. The past still haunted them, but the future, for the first time in years, was theirs. And somewhere out there, a whistleblower's story, their story, continued to echo across the world, reminding everyone that not all ghosts are dead, and not every disappearance is an accident. Sometimes, the ones who vanish are taken, and sometimes they find their way back. Please subscribe, like, share, and click the notification bell for more interesting videos like this.